Okay, I'd like to call a meeting of the Budget Review Committee to order. It's Thursday, September 6, 2018, at 7 p.m., and we're in the Aldermatic Chamber. Would the clerk please call a roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alderman at Large Laurie Wilshire.
Here.
Alderman at Large Brian McCarthy. Present. Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien is present. Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly is absent. Alderman at Large David Tenza.
Present.
And Alderman Jan Schmidt.
I am here.
Also in attendance, Alderman Jettie, our Mayor Jim Donches, and John Griffin, CFO Comptroller.
And the chairman's here.
And the chairman also was present. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone that would like to speak to the committee? Seeing no one, communications, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From Mayor Jim Donches, reasons fiscal year 2019 like-for-like escrows.
There being no objection, I'll accept the communication and place it on file. Okay.
Okay.
And there being no objection, I'd like to suspend the rules to accept and place on file a communication received from Jennifer McCormick, Library Director, regarding the Court Street Plaza area. Okay.
Okay.
Unfinished business,
There is none.
new business resolutions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before us, we have R 18068, relative to the reappropriation of fiscal year 2019 escrows. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to recommend final passage.
The motion on the floor is to recommend final passage of R 18068. Would the mayor and CFO like to come up and?
Could Ms. McCormick?
Oh, sure, no problem. So I had talked to Mr. Griffin, Mayor, about if you'd just give a little overview for the public and the new alderman to what the like-for-like escrows is generally, and then you can get into the specifics.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to adjust my chair, but that's not going that well. In any event, thank you for having me, and I'm here to talk about the various escrows that you're looking at. Now, as background for the people who haven't been through this, this is a traditional year-by-year process that the city's been going through for a long time. There are, in general, two sources of surplus money. Number one, revenue, which exceeds the projections in the budget. And number two, and that is the largest factor in the surplus. The number two are the unexpended appropriations, money that has been budgeted but not spent. And I suppose third, where there's surplus with respect to projects that were previously budgeted or previously escrowed that are simply being carried forward again from the year before. So, and John can correct anything that I say here, but the like escrows, if the escrow is simply a project that is being re-escrowed from the year before, or is simply being held for an expenditure that it was specifically budgeted for, the mayor has the authority to make the so-called like-for-like escrow. So, and what we do is I just give you a list of those. Of course, we're available for any questions, but on that. But just to take an example in the like-for-like, number two, DPW engineering. The fund the cost of bridge rehabilitation program. So that is a ongoing project that has to do with the improvement of the red-listed bridge on Canal Street near BAE. And that was budgeted in a prior year, and the project's not finished. They're doing the engineering, but it's still, the work still needs to be done. So because that is a kind of a continuation of simply a project that was previously approved by the Board of Aldermen, It is a like-for-like escrow, and I included on the like-for-like escrow list. And, we could go through any of the ones there that you wish. But the, the ones that I intend to focus on most now, subject to your questions, is, of course, are the so-called unlike requests, which are basically the funds which remain unexpended from various accounts across the city, which we are suggesting be allocated to either a slightly or somewhat different purpose. Now, as I mentioned, the largest proportion of the surplus that you will see, which ultimately will be $8.5 million, $8.5 million, will be revenue which exceeds the budget, which you will get the specifics on that very soon, and you need to approve a decision as to how much of that excess revenue we should apply to reduce the tax rate. And generally, the vast majority goes in that direction. And either that or into the so-called overlay account. And you will see the recommendation on that in the next probably in the next couple of weeks, and you will need to approve or decide what to do. So with respect to these unlike escrows, we are talking about, maybe a quarter of the surplus, again, constituted or consisting of the unexpended appropriations. Now, first of all, as an overview, I'm proposing here, as I have in prior years, that the vast majority of this money go into various reserve accounts to help defray, future expenses. And that is also kind of a tradition to try to use this money to help us with expenses we know we will get in future years. Some people have asked in that instance, well, what about returning the money to the taxpayers? Well, to the extent we're putting money into the reserve accounts, we are, because any dollar we put into a reserve account means it's a dollar we don't have to tax for later. Out of the $2 and some million we see here, 1.3 million is proposed to go into SURF. SURF is the Capital Equipment Reserve Fund used to purchase equipment in the future. And we have a whole schedule of all of the equipment that the city owns, and the SURF numbers are allocated against each piece of equipment, and this is the account from which equipment is purchased. We didn't budget a lot of money for SURF in the regular budget this year. Remember, the budget is only up 1.6%, less than the rate of inflation. I think we budgeted $1 million into SURF. We really should do more than that. So as we've done in prior years, out of the unexpended money, were you to follow this recommendation, $1,325,000 would go into SURF. The second item, and I'm in the larger list down at the bottom, the second item, line 19, is another reserve account. We have a reserve account that we use to meet maintenance and other expenses regarding city buildings. And currently we have, if there's an emergency, if a boiler breaks, if something happens, if we think we need to make an improvement, we have a reserve account of about $500,000. A little bit has been spent recently, but typically we replenish that account every year out of the escrows to ensure that if we have a significant problem, we have the money to cover it. So this would cover all the fire stations, City Hall, Court Street, all city buildings that are not school related. The next one is the reserve account or the property and casualty internal service fund. What this does is it's an account from which we pay for insurance, but for which we also pay for any liability incurred for the city, by the city. We currently have a balance of about $3 million, but we want to make sure, and much of that will get expended during the year on various insurance policies and claims, but we want to make sure that there's enough money in there always to meet any city liability. For example, the Finance Committee just last night approved a $300,000 contribution, which is the deductible on a major claim against the city in a lawsuit brought by the young man who died a couple of years ago at the time of a rainstorm when the grate over the catch basin was open. We want to make sure there's enough money in there to settle claims and make sure that the city's covered on all its liability. Now, we're being very conservative when it comes to that because we probably, we may not need that money this year, but because we've just settled a $300,000 claim, I thought it is best to kind of monitor that account for the next couple of months, and then if we don't actually need the $200,000, we could do something else, but right now, I'm suggesting we put it into that reserve account. The next one is for school retirements. This is a reserve account that helps the school department pay for retirements. When someone retires, they owe this person they owe the employee a certain amount of money, and based on their contract, and traditionally we make sure that that is replenished at this point in the year to make sure that they have enough money to cover the retirements. Now, the next one is not a reserve account, but it would enable us to make sidewalk improvements, $100,000. We have given, over the years, this is kind of a typical amount to the street department to help them try to catch up on, sidewalk repair and improvement. I mean, the streets need a lot of work. The sidewalks need much, much more work. So $100,000 is not it doesn't get you that much in terms of sidewalks, believe it or not, but it gets you something. So it's kind of an infrastructure maintenance issue. Now, the next, riverfront invasive species removal. Of course, that is not a reserve account, but we are about to have the opening of the Brady Sullivan, Franklin Street mill to housing conversion project. 200 units should open this month. We have two banks of the river, and we have the riverfront park on the south, the Renaissance Park. People can't even see the river from these riverfront areas because there's so much growth of invasive species along the river. So to kind of open up this major asset, we have done and passed a riverfront master plan to sort of begin to think about that and to begin to implement that. We have to get rid of these bushes and all this kind of stuff and replant in a way that can be maintained so that people can actually see the river and enjoy the river, which we think is a major asset when they're down near it. And we're going to be bringing in, hundreds of thousands of dollars from that apartment complex alone. We think this is a major opportunity to add to that region, that area in general. Major opportunity to add to the tax base, to bring in more taxes, to create economic growth, and getting all of this garbage out of the way is, I think, a big objective there. The next big one, or larger one, is $150,000 for the library plaza improvements. Now, this is a new project, but one that has been, and Ms. McCormick is here to discuss that, but one that has been stimulated by events which have occurred, and kind of a thought process that occurred since the budget was certainly proposed and even passed. We have, in between the library and the Court Street building, what I would call is a very important public space, and one that has been neglected and which has been deteriorated over the years. When that space was first built, it was at the time of the library's built, we think, and at that point, the Court Street building was a children's museum, and the thought was that there would be a lot of traffic in between the two buildings. And in fact, you see that there's actually a sidewalk that used to run between the two buildings. But Court Street became almost a defunct building for a long time. And because of a lot of skateboarding and other activity in there, at some point, the sidewalks were blocked and all that. What we have now are a lot of people who conduct, really illegal activities in there, a lot of drug use. Ms. McCormick can tell you about, some fighting, and it's just a totally, it's an area, it's kind of like no man's land. And because it's an important public space, because we are activating Court Street generally, a brew pub, now some artist studios. Of course, we do have the Streeter Theater, a lot of community theater. We think that it's important to try to activate that space, improve that space, set it up so that we can move the kind of unsavory activity out of that area and have citizens use this space. The library is also looking at some improvements that they might be able to make using some of their trust funds with respect to sculpture and the like in this area. And so this is $150,000, but I think we could bring about, and we would get a designer. I mean, I think we could bring about an improvement in a major public space, but I will let Ms. McCormick fill you in on some of the other details. There are a couple of other smaller items here. There's money for downtown concerts, $20,000. This is how we've been funding the downtown concerts for some years now, is through the escrow process. This is the same number as last year and the year before. The Tree Streets improvements, that would be a new expenditure, $25,000. What we'd like to do is get the Tree Streets residents involved in deciding how to spend some money in their neighborhood. $25,000, choose your project, maybe vote on it, develop some alternatives, have them vote on it, and get more people interested in the neighborhood and engage more people where we have a neighborhood that has a lot of potential, and this could help bring that out. So that kind of goes through, that goes through over 90% of all this. The rest of it are, things within it. The above the top line are things within a department, like Public Works has saved money by not spending it, but there's stuff that they really critically need. A tire machine and balancer, they really should have that. Has broken down very recently. There's a lot of public demand for speed radar feedback signs, like on West Hollis Street. We need to be able to post those to try to get this traffic that's, slowed down out there. There's an ice melting machine. You can see that for $5,000. Repairs to a gator plow, a diesel tank removal, that's come up recently. Things like that. And the largest item there is $80,000. Now, that is currently this is not really, this is actually a like for like, it is currently a like for like escrow, because some years ago, the city budgeted $150,000 to revive the river fountains in the river. And we've been working through various complications, which I can get into, but maybe it's not totally necessary now, to make that happen, having to do with the extension of electricity and a lot of other things. But as we've gotten RFPs, so I have the authority to do a like-by-like escrow on that, which was on the like-to-like escrow list. But as we have sort of gotten more deeply into the issue of what these fountains might cost and what kind of design we'd get out of it, it seemed to me that we rather than having multiple fountains, we might have one, and then at least retain the flexibility to spend some of that money on some kind of, lighting. We're going to have more pedestrians there now. These are basically unlit walkways. So this would simply move a like-for-like escrow devoted to riverfront fountains and expand the possibilities there to include riverfront lighting or some other kind of riverfront use. So again, this is a like-for-like escrow, but because we're expanding the possibility in terms of its, exactly how it would be spent along the river, it's in the unlike-for-like list. But were you not to approve that, I think it would just go back to the like-for-like list and would be still devoted to riverfront fountains. That's a long explanation, but I guess I would ask, since I've touched on the 150 for the plaza in between, the library plaza. I think Ms. McCormick has been very observant regarding what's going on there and some of the problems. So maybe I would ask, if she doesn't mind, I will ask her, and she's written you a letter on this subject, to kind of talk about what's been going on and how we might be able to work together with the library to really improve what I'm saying is a major public space.
Thank you. So hopefully you all had a chance to read my letter. The board asked me to come tonight to accompany my letter just to convey their support for the mayor's request and their sense of urgency for some attention to that plaza area. This has been a summer like no other. This is my 9th summer here. It's really discouraging, and we're hearing, I think I relayed in my letter, we're hearing more and more stories from families, especially that don't want to come to the library because it's uncomfortable for them. The board we've taken some steps. DPW did some pruning, so we have a little better coverage with our security cameras. We removed just about every shrub on the property to discourage people from sleeping under them and storing their belongings. We did remove the kiosk from the plaza, which was kind of an eyesore. We hope to replace that closer to Court Street. The fountain, I think the mayor kind of referred to some other improvements. The lovely fountain in front of the library hasn't operated all summer, and it's not really worth repairing. So the board's hoping to commission a piece to commemorate our 50th anniversary. That's coming up in a couple of years. But we really, along with the mayor, would like some bigger, better ideas to make that, to really revitalize that space and invite more active programming and more positive uses of it, and which hopefully will have the effect of discouraging the more negative uses. We do have full-time security coverage, and we do have liaison officers visit us daily. We're also, from what I understand, are required patrol on the morning shift for the police department to move the people along that camp under the libraries. The library, our architect is actually coming out next week to look at the moats with me to decide if there is a solution to block those so that people are no longer able to climb under the building. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I think my memo and the mayor's remarks addressed them.
Okay, Alderman McCarthy, you have a question?
Yeah, a couple. I want to thank you for trying to take care of it. Fixing the moat would be either fixing the moat or populating it would be a good solution to the problem.
Yeah.
There's, as I recall, in the courtyard itself, there's currently a sculpture, correct?
There are two sculptures on the lower plazas, and then on that plaza that we recently kind of renovated, there are 2 or 3. A couple of the turtles are there from the turtle year.
I assume that in general, the sculptures will stay.
Right. I think the mayor's plan was to invite the sculpture symposium into whatever planning process happens, so we can respect.
I was
their
going to
locations.
suggest in terms of getting rid of the fountain and commissioning something for the anniversary, that you actually speak to the sculpture symposium. That seems like a great way to solve that problem.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Alderman Tenza.
Thank you. Like President McCarthy, thank you for taking this on, because, you have enough going on inside the library, and to have to worry about what's going on outside too, is a lot more on your plate. A couple of things people have reached out to me about is, maybe having designated smoking areas as part of any redevelopment, so that people aren't allowed to smoke right in front of the library. And I understand that's tough to patrol, but I think that would help. And there's certainly some areas around the library where you could make that happen. The other thing too that I just wanted to bring up is that I don't think this is just a problem for the library. I appreciate you bringing this to us, but I think that maybe this is an issue we can bring up to the Downtown Improvements Committee as well. And I think that there are other agencies in the area that are trying to give folks and other spaces, other outlets to be during the day if they don't have any place else to go other than the outside of the library. So I hope this is a project we can all work on together to find a solution that works for everybody.
Any other questions?
Are these limited to Ms. McCormick? Or?
At the moment. One thing, when we spend this money and clean the plaza up, always being involved in life cycle support activities in my profession, we need to make sure that there'll be ongoing funds to keep it, once it's put in a pristine condition, that we maintain it. Otherwise, we'll be throwing good money after bad. The one thing you need, first of all, the cameras that they have there, HD, high def.
Yes.
So, and if you want to keep that area clean, especially in the evening, you need good lighting on the space. If you have it well lit all night long, you'll see a lot of that activity go away because people don't like to be doing the things that you had mentioned in your letter under the bright lights. So it's unfortunate you have to have that kind of lighting, but if that will drive a lot of that away. So, but I think it's a good idea. I think it behooves us to have a very presentable area right outside the library. It'll increase the activity in the library and make people feel a lot safer. Okay, no other questions on the library? Other questions for Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions on the escrows. First one, the invasive species, I assume that's restricted to land species and not aquatic species from the description you gave.
Correct.
Are the things that are there actually invasive, or are they just really tenacious?
Well, maybe that's a fine line.
Having cleared the bank where the park is on the other side of the river, I'm familiar with how dense the vegetation gets, but.
So this would need to be a, cutting, not only cutting, but really removal of what is there and the planting of other plants. And I'm not, totally versatile in exactly what that would be, but other plants that would enable, that could take root and could be maintained in a way that the riverfront would always be, the river would always be visible and wouldn't be blocked by all this, this junk vegetation. So, maybe those things are probably, we call them invasives, but yeah, they're probably native to New England or whatever, but, they're not the kind of stuff you want along the river if you want to, showcase it and use it as, to meet its potential.
And I assume we'll get all the necessary permits to work in the wetlands buffer when we do that.
We would definitely do that.
McCarthy?
Yeah, my other question is on the SURF contribution. And I mean, let me just preface it by, I'm as big a fan of putting money in the SURF account as anybody, but I'm also really sensitive about the current goings-on with the budget and the tax rate and the fact that we don't have a clear picture of what's going to happen. So I'm a little worried about that. I guess first questions I'd ask are not directly on the escrows, but on in the way the fund balance will be after the surplus is put in it. What amount of money do we have between the 10% reserve that we tell ourselves we should have and the fund balance at that point?
I think John can answer that specifically, but I'd say like a couple million. The 10% is more like mid, 260, 26 and a half or something like that. And we have like 28. So we're in the 11 to 12% range. But I don't know if John has specific.
John Griffin, CFO, to follow on, we're actually doing quite well with that balance above 10%. We're projecting 11.5. In addition to what the mayor said of the 2.5, we also have 1.5 million of overlay in reserve. So if you add the two together, it's about 4 million.
So what number are we proposing out of that to use to offset the tax rate, or I mean, what number could we use?
Well, so we're going to propose probably, you'll get this, but of course the aldermen have to approve whatever we do, $4.5 million towards the tax rate.
Oh, and that's before we have the 28 million though, right? So
Correct, yes.
we really have 32.
Yes.
You're going to
Yes.
propose 4 or 4
More
and a
than
half.
32 because we got to put money into overlay as well.
Ah, okay.
So, so it would be more into the mid-30s. And we put some money into overlay. Overlay is money that's used to settle property tax cases, abatement cases. So we always have to put money into overlay every year. And so mid-30s, we put some money into overlay, maybe 4.5 million to the tax rate. And that's where the surplus revenue goes.
And after that, we have 11.5%?
Yes.
Okay, so we could potentially then put
Maybe
another,
if I can update just one, we think we can hit 30 million on the unassigned fund balance. If we're able to use out of the revenue surplus, we can use maybe 500,000 to 750,000 to add to the unassigned. So we're in good shape there. As the mayor said, the overlay, as opposed to the last 2 years, as opposed to clearing that into surplus, we've actually carried it forward. There's about 2.6 million left there. And then we're just deciding on how much overlay to put in. Overlay historically, as the mayor indicated, it pays abatement requests and Supreme Court judgments and so forth. But looking at the 16-year look back, we've never had, even with the evaluations that have been going on, especially in the 05-06 time, there hasn't been a significant drain. That tells us that there hasn't been a significant like $4 or $5 million drain through abatement. So it's kept steady with about a $2 million influx per year.
I would ask you to go back and look at 1995, shortly after the last full reval, when we had a $5.5 million problem with the overlay.
Right. Treasurer Fredette gave me that report, that blue ribbon committee that studied the reasons for that. But fortunately, since that report, and from at least 2002 to today, we're in good shape. But we're cognizant of those pressures on the overlay.
So I guess I have no objection to putting the money into SURF at the moment, as long as we don't spend it right at the moment, and that, you know, if a worst-case scenario evolves, we can in fact then transfer it back into offsetting the tax rate if we need to do that.
I mean, I think I do have some more information on the revaluation, which I don't know if you want that or not now. I mean, it's a little different than we thought, I would say. You want me to get into that, or?
You want to cover that at the end after we talk about these, so it's sort of a separate subject? Why don't we wait till after we get the questions on this? I think I asked quite some time ago to have a special meeting on SURF. And I know going through the budget process, I had talked to the other department heads, and I know that we've already pushed off some acquisitions under SURF, but I think it might be a good idea if we had a presentation on what the SURF plan is, what we're thinking of buying this year, what we're pushing off, and then we have a better idea as to what we should and shouldn't be doing with SURF money.
No problem.
Okay.
Whenever you want. Yeah, we can
Right.
just, whenever it's convenient for the David Fredette and the others involved,
Right.
you know, we just set up a meeting.
Other questions? Alderman Jettie?
So, I'm all ears to hear what the mayor's gonna say about the revaluation, and maybe what I'm about to say is gonna be irrelevant when we hear from him, but, my concern is that when you presented the budget to us, Mayor, you told us about, how it was a conservative budget purposely because of the reevaluation and the fear that the burden, after the reevaluation, the burden would shift to some degree more on the residential taxpayers than the commercial taxpayers, and that we were concerned that it may result in an increase in people's taxes, and we wanted to be very sensitive to that. So you asked all the departments to bring in very conservative budgets, and I know some of us, you know, there was a motion to add money to the budget to pay English as a second language teachers, and that was defeated. And part of the discussion was that with this reevaluation, we don't know what's going to happen, and you know, let's stay conservative, and let's see what happens after the reevaluation numbers all come in. So, you know, we adopted the mayor's budget with that rationale. So, and I fully acknowledge that you know a lot more about running a city than I do. You've done a great job, and I support the job you're doing, but I was disappointed to see this proposal for, I think I understand the transfer of you know, these are projects that were budgeted, they're ongoing, we haven't finished them, and so I understand that part of it. But the unlike stuff, you know, maybe I just don't understand, but it seems to me that we're just, you know, spending some money that has not been budgeted. We're spending some money on some projects that some people think are great. I mean, it's hard to argue against some of I mean, I would love to see, I know a couple of spots in my ward where these speed radar signs would be welcome. Dealing with the invasive vegetation along the riverbank is a great thing. I would love to solve the library's problem. But it seems like we're going against what we said before about keeping the budget conservative to see what happens with the reevaluation. And you know, we asked all the departments to to tighten up their budgets. And, and they did that. And now we're spending money on a few projects which have, I may be wrong, but I don't think they have been completely vetted. I don't think I recognize the problems between the library and the Court Street Theater. I'm not sure that a very deep study has been made as to how to solve that problem. I don't know that spiffing up the plaza is going to solve the problem. Maybe it will, I don't know. But it seems like there should be more thought put into that. And I'm sure if we said to the fire department that we've got this found money, I know they were looking for a couple of more dispatchers. I'm sure the police department would like some more money. The school department certainly would. And maybe I'm a new alderman, so maybe I'm wrong in my understanding of this thing, but it seems that we ought to hold on to this money, until the revaluation and the tax rate is set and we find out what we're doing. The budget this year was a conservative budget. I'm sure next year's budget is not going to be any less. And so, it seemed it would make sense to me to hold on to this money and use it for future projects after we're able to go through the whole process like we did on the budget this year with all the hearings we had, all the meetings we had, and all the input we had. So I'm reluctant to spend this money for those reasons.
Alderman McCarthy, you want to?
Yeah, I think unless we spend it within the next month or so, it will always be available to offset the effects of the reval if we need it. What I wouldn't want to do is put it into salary items that then necessitate a repeat in the next budget, and eat into the decisions we can make next year, before we've had a chance to look at them and make them. So I guess I understand the point, and I think it's the same one I made. Surf is by far the largest item in here. It's half of the resolution, so it's the one I'd worry about the most. But I think, I'm fine with putting the money aside, earmarked for these other projects, with the provision that if we need to go back to it, we can revisit that in a month or so when we understand what the tax rate projection looks like, and if we need to make any last minute adjustments, we can do that.
Mr. Griffin, can you explain that if this gets approved, well, first of all, this is only a budget, so it's going to go to the full board, but when this is approved, are there further actions that have to be taken before this is spent?
Traditionally, this is the next step in the closing process of a fiscal year. So we're getting, the end of September, early October, you want to kind of be done. If the money goes into SURF, it goes into a fund, and if no one comes forward with the purchase of anything, as Alderman McCarthy, and we're going to have it in the fund. You can transfer it through legislation for other purposes.
All right, but let me answer that a little more completely. Anything that goes into a reserve account, and, there's $1.3 million into SURF, 100,000 into another reserve account, there's another 600. Again, in my point of view, we are defraying, we are saving money putting aside money to avoid taxing for these things in the future. So, in a way, so I think we are basically giving that money to the taxpayers. But any transfer out of a reserve account requires automatic approval. Period. Number two, with respect to any of these other smaller items, there would need to be well, first of all, there would have to be a contract. I mean, you'd have to say along the riverbank. I mean, we're gonna have a contract. You know, we would come forward with a contract with someone to do this. This isn't gonna be done by city labor. I mean, they don't, and we would need to get that approved through the finance committee. So, there'd be some, depending on what it was, there would be some degree of, you know, a necessity of aldermanic participation in anything. The plaza expenditure, I mean, that would require, you know, a contract with a designer. It would require, I mean, this is a major public space, and we would have to propose, you know, we'd have to come up with plans. We'd have to review that with a planning board. We'd certainly want to review that with the alderman, want to come up with cost estimates. Yeah, I mean, this would be an involved process. So it's not like, you know, someone else can go out and just write checks, start writing checks on this stuff. As usual, I mean, there's always, you know, there's aldermanic oversight and approvals required for all, you know, all these kind of items.
So for Alderman Jettie, I just wanted to point that there are other checks and balances before this money would be spent. It's putting it in reserve accounts in case we need it. But before any of it's spent, it would have to come back for approval. Alderman McCarthy?
I would also point out that if this gets approved, it'll get approved on the 12th of September, and that puts us 3 weeks away from setting the tax rate. I doubt we're going to spend it all in the time it takes to finish up the paperwork.
Right. Any other questions? Is a follow-up?
Yeah, just as a follow-up,
Okay.
you know,
Alderman Jettie?
I understand what you're saying, but once it's put into a reserve account labeled, you know, riverbank improvement, and, you know, when the next step comes and you say, okay, we want to sign this contract to have the riverbank improved, and, you know, the money's here in this reserve account, it's a slipperier slope than arguing for those things in the budget process. So I understand what you're saying, but I still think that you know, we may be avoiding, you know, the whole budget process that, you know, that we went through several months of hearings on, in order to you know, have people justify, you know, what they want to spend the money on, and prioritize their different projects. But just my opinion.
Alderman Tenza?
So, if I could just ask this question, if we don't roll these funds over into a new line item or into a reserve account, what happens? The books for FY18 just stay open, and
John can correct me, but basically it would flow into the kind of the general account, and would probably end up being added to the big number that John was talking about, the undesignated reserve, undesignated fund balance. Now, the problem with, it's a huge amount of money we have in there. Much more than I personally like having in there, but, because in my opinion, we don't really need that, but that level of money in the bank. But, first of all, we have an ordinance that requires 10%. And number two, there is intense pressure from the financial industry to maintain, and this is something that's kind of happened within the last, since I was mayor before. I mean, we never had this kind of, you know, we never had this kind of money in the bank because we wanted to use it or give it back to the taxpayers or whatever. But there's intense financial pressure to maintain, to have a growing surplus account. And that is what the bond rating is all about. This is like a big reason we have a AAA bond rating. We got this much money in the bank and that we don't really ever draw against. I mean, it's like something we'll never use, in my personal opinion. You know, I mean, it grows gradually, and, you know, just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Never has the city really tapped it. And I don't know if it ever will, but in terms of satisfying the rating agencies, the financial advisors, and all that, this is what they're expecting these days. I think some of it has to do with, you know, these pension deficits and all this. They want to see these kind of ironclad, you know, balance sheets, and that's what we have, you know. And so this would probably go into that account. My point there is, once it's in there, it's pretty hard to get it out because once you sort of reduce your unanticipated reserve, now that's a red flag. Like, why did you do that? So once it's in there, it's not so easy to get it out.
So
Is that a fair statement?
That's absolutely true. And with regard to the SURF, if I may, a year ago, you all approved the use of $500,000 to pay for the reval and respectfully requested that the mayor think about replacing it. So 500,000 of the 1.325 million is that. And I think, as Alderman Dowd mentioned, the review of the SURF is gonna be an eye opener with regard to what was done back in 2009, 2010, the steady pace of replacement, and then here's everything that needs to be replaced. So there's more needs there than what would be 2.325 million. I can tell you. I mean,
So,
certain trucks and things like that are very expensive. Fire apparatus, things like that.
one other thing to point out is just taking the library fix as an example, the 150,000. If we didn't spend it on, we didn't put the money aside in here on tax monies already collected, and we had to do it next year because it's a safety item, we would then have to add it to next year's budget, which would up the budget costs. This money is already collected. We're not going to tax people on this again. So this would be, I think the library issue is, if we want to maintain a viable library and have it safe and have people go there, we're going to have to do something about that outside area. We can pay for it this way and have it taken care of, and it's not going to affect last year's tax rate. Or we can wait and have to spend it or bond for it or something else to pay for it later, and that will add to the tax rate. So, Alderman Jettie?
Except, am I not correct that if we don't spend this money, the amount that we would have to raise by taxes next year would be less because we'd have this money?
No.
That's not true?
Alderman McCarthy, you want to?
The amount that goes to offset taxes is what we set with the resolution at the upcoming meeting. It is, if we have to do that, it would be a lot easier to transfer the money out of reserve accounts to offset the tax rate than it is to vote it back out of the undesignated fund balance. So it is hopefully a moot point at the moment, but in an environment where expenses have a cap, that turns it back from post-cap money into pre-cap money when it goes back into the undesignated fund balance. So I would recommend that we keep it in the reserve accounts and draw from them if we need to get additional money to offset the tax rate. If you don't pass this, all that happens is it lapses into the undesignated fund balance, and it then takes another vote of the Board of Aldermen to do anything with it.
So, unless there are any other questions on the specific line items that were addressed tonight.
If I may just quickly, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
As far as the vegetation removal for the riverfront, do you have a sense of the $100,000? Will that take care of all of the vegetation or invasive species removal from the Main Street Bridge to the end of the Cotton Mill area?
Of course, we haven't gotten a cost, bids and all that, but yes, we think it's enough to cover that whole area.
Okay.
So the whole kind of riverfront from, as you said, the bridge down to kind of the end of Clock Tower and the end of the mill yard, basically.
And that would be on both sides?
Both sides, yeah.
And then if I may, just very quickly, you know, as far as the fountains on the river, I would much rather see us as a city spend money on lighting than the fountain. I think the hope is to have people in the river using it as much as enjoying it from the outside, and I'm not sure how the fountains play into that, so.
Well, now, the way the fountains came up is when we did, now this, again, this is money that's been carried forward for a couple of years now, I think. The way the fountains came about was that was when we did the Riverfront Master Plan, there was a lot of online and other input provided by the public. And the item that received the most support was these riverfront fountains. So at that point, the Board of Aldermen voted $150,000 to make that happen. But few things have occurred. Number one, there's been a lot of problems with not enough electricity and not any bidders and, you know, all this. And as we've sort of progressed and as some of the other changes have occurred along the riverfront, it just seems like 150 for fountains, even though we probably should have one to make sure that, you know, that there used to be one there and it's, you know, broken and everything. We've extended electricity in various ways that I can describe, but you know, if we get one and we have money left over of the 150, you know, maybe one is good enough, and maybe, as you suggested, you know, rather than just keep reserving it for the fountains, we switch it to the lighting so that people can enjoy, new residents and older, you know, longer-term residents can enjoy the riverfront in the evening hours.
I don't know if the new aldermen have a copy of the riverfront development plan that was put out, which addresses a lot of this, and does any part of the TIF that we set up for this area cover any of those costs?
Yes.
Okay, so, you know, we've made an effort to improve that whole area, and I know this year has been especially bad for things growing because of the heat, humidity, and everything. It's like Guam, for God's sake. And so I, for one, have for years hoped we'd clean up the edges of the river if we ever want to make it decent going through Nashua, like in most other towns. We need to do something, so I would not be opposed to cleaning up the river edges so that, you know, it's a lot more attractive. And if we're going to have all those new apartments and people living on both sides of the river in that area, it's going to be beneficial for a lot of taxpayers. So if there are no more questions on the specifics, I'll let the mayor go into information relative to the reassessment. I did send an email to you today. The Ward 2 meeting went much, much better than the Ward 1 meeting, except for the areas I mentioned.
Your input was helpful, and we gave that feedback to the KRT. All right, well, I think we definitely made the right decision in hiring KRT because they've applied the income approach to commercial properties. And to the degree, you know, we were very concerned that the revaluation could result or would result in a major shift from residential to commercial or commercial to residential because commercial was not going up as much as residential. But because of the, I think, good work done by KRT, that is going to be very modest. We may even see, now they haven't finalized the commercial values. Those letters are going to go out a week from Friday, but we may see the commercial go up nearly the same as the residential. But that's not the end of the story, so don't get too happy yet. The total values will go up a couple $2 billion from like 8.3 to about 10.5, 10.6. The but is within the residential single-family realm. There's going to be a lot of variance in terms of the impact on homes. The average, you know, the median, the average is up around 25, 24, 23. but there are some that have gone up not at all, some that have gone up 10%, some that have gone up 40, 50, 60%. Now, everybody, some people are concerned that, oh my God, my assessment went up 25%, my taxes are going to go up 25%. There's not a translation between the amount the assessment is going up and what's going to happen with the taxes. In fact, for someone whose property went up 25%, you're going to see 3, maybe 4% on your tax bill. Someone who had only a 20% increase, you may see a slight reduction in your tax bill. Someone who had a 10% increase is going to have in their assessment, is likely to have a significant reduction in their tax bill. Someone who's flat, a very significant reduction. On the other hand, someone whose property went up 40%, they're going to see a significant increase. Someone who went up 50, 60, it's going to be very significant. So the problem is that within the single family realm, because we are basically, remember, this is a state required revaluation. We're doing this pursuant to state law. The DRA was at the first hearing. I mean, they're watching everything that's being done. DRA, Department of Revenue Administration, the state agency that supervises property tax assessments and the whole property tax system. Some houses have gone up so much that you will see within the single-family realm a kind of redistribution of the tax burden. And some people will do very well, and some people won't do very well. And that's kind of, from my point of view, not great news because we don't, yeah, someone's home might have gone from 200 to 300. That's great, long term, I suppose, but that today it means a lot more taxes. On the other hand, I think what it shows is that, it was smart to bring in K and KRT because no one has really taken a deep, there've just been these kind of automatic upgrades. No one has looked this deeply into the value of every house. Not every house has been visited even now, but still, each house has been individually looked at. And some were way out of whack is the reality. Plus there's and you'll see even some going down. I mean, a few, not a lot, but some. And the escalation of values has been kind of uneven, so it will have a very uneven effect on homeowners.
The biggest problem I see is potentially being in real estate. The homes that have been selling over the last couple of years, particularly the last year, are the low end because that's new home buyers and people trying to afford a home, and they're buying in the say 230, 260 range. And what we're finding is that there's bidding wars on those homes, and almost all of the sales are above the asking price. So those have gone up dramatically. What hasn't been in the people that are buying these equations is that when they go through this reassessment and the taxes used to be X, and now because the home value from when it was assessed the last time has risen so high, the new tax bill is going to be Y. I think it's going to be a burden on a lot of the homeowners in that range. And I don't know how he solved that.
That's correct. On average, now it's all on average because within each of these categories there are certainly exceptions. But on average, the homes that are at the more affordable homes have gone up more percentage-wise than some of the more expensive ones. Now there are exceptions. I mean, I just looked at a house on Concord Street, went up 30%, into the 800. So there are certainly exceptions to the kind of general rule, but generally speaking, the lower the more affordable homes have gone up more because the demand is very strong for those. And even since now the revaluation was done as of April 1st, 2018. So that's what the value, that's when the value, the date on which the value is fixed. Since that time, their KRT's work has shown that values have gone up 6% homes since April 1. Now we're in September. So in the last 5 months, they're showing, based on sales that they've looked at, a 6% increase since April. So someday this is going to end, I know, but right now the prices continue to be very strong.
Any questions? Alderman Tenza.
Thank you. So for people who are watching, might be listening to this, if they wanted to contest or challenge their reevaluation, what's the best course? I know that there are these meetings going on in every ward that people can show up to. What kind of information should they be bringing for the assessors to look at?
Well, first of all, the best course to pursue is to go to the meeting and meet with KRT and talk with them about how they arrived at the value and bring any information that might suggest that the value is too much or too little. I doubt we'll get many of that, but if you have an appraisal, something that suggests, maybe you had a bank appraisal 2 months ago and it was much lower or something like that, bring that and show it to KRT. Now, anybody who has a discussion with KRT at one of the meetings, and we've held now wards 1, 2, and 3, 3 is tonight, and who's still unsatisfied, city appraisers will go out, the city appraiser staff will go out and actually physically look at the house to, try to take a more detailed look, and we'll work with KRT to see if the value should be revised. I mean, they've clearly located at least some that need to be revised. I mean, a lot of people, may not be aware of exactly how much, their house has gone up in value because they don't have it on the market. And so not everybody who thinks their value is too high will be right, but some people will be. And hopefully KRT is pretty accurate with respect to the vast majority, but certainly, if people want to have further review, they can get it.
Having been at the last 2 meetings, I think it's unclear if people are challenging the appraisal to KRT, whether KRT is going to change anything or what the process is from here out. And I think that should be clarified on the foregoing meetings on the other wards. What is the overall process? People still don't understand, they think that letter they got is cast in concrete and, they're going to multiply it times whatever the tax rate is, and that's their new tax bill. And we alleviated a lot of that concern last night for people to some degree, but it's still unclear. Even KRT was unclear as to what's the process from here till they receive a tax bill.
Well, having met with them today, I mean, they definitely, if anyone, first go to the meeting and talk with them. If you're not convinced, just let them know that, and city staff will go out and inspect the house, and then they'll get back to you with another letter, either with the same value or a different one, depending on their conclusions following that review.
Okay, I see another hand up. Alderman Schmidt.
If someone was unable to attend their ward meeting, what would be the next step for them?
Well, they could go to a different ward.
Okay.
I mean, the idea is to kind of organize this thing in a way that's manageable. But like, for example, there was a guy, a gentleman who I think was, in Ward 1 actually, and then showed up the next night to talk about the thing further and
Yeah, it's the other way.
provide.
He lives in Ward 2, he went
Yeah,
to Ward 1.
yeah, so he either went to, I think he lived in Ward 2 and went to Ward 1 or whatever. But he's gone to 2 meetings, he came back with some more information, which actually seemed kind of convincing. But they're not saying, oh gosh, you know, you live in Ward 4 and we're doing Ward 5 tonight, so we refuse, you know, you've lost your chance. They're not gonna do that. We'd like people to go on the right night if they possibly can, just to kind of, because they've parceled out the time and all that, so that, you know, to try to manage it so people don't have to wait. But if you miss it, go to another night.
Thank you.
Any other, Alderman Tenz, Jettie?
And I think if people are not satisfied with what results from KRT's, their meeting with KRT, or the city assessing department, when they get their tax bill, there is an opportunity to file for an abatement where they could again have an opportunity to say their assessment was too high and give the reasons for it. And ultimately, they can meet with the Bureau of Land Tax Appeals, or I think it is, and so that they're not, even if KRT doesn't, if they're not satisfied with KRT, there are other opportunities where more independent forum can hear their evidence and make a decision. And could I ask another question?
Sure.
So Mayor, when this first started, I think when we were first early in our terms, I think you met with us and explained that you really would have preferred that a complete reevaluation be done, where they actually go to each home and inspect it, but that we didn't have enough time to do that, and the state wouldn't give us an extension, and so we ended up doing this statistical review. So we're going to have to do this in another 5 years. Are you going to look to do a complete reevaluation the next time around? And you know, will you start putting that into place so that we don't miss that opportunity?
Well, I don't know if it's an opportunity or not. I mean, it's 3 times the cost, $1.5 million instead of $500,000. And you might pick up additional value, but you might not. And in addition, I mean, one advantage of doing that full review was that it would have bought us a couple more years, and we would have been able to delay what seemed to be a negative impact for homeowners for a couple of years if we had gotten permission to go forward. So I think we'd have to make a joint decision, we, the Board of Aldermen, the mayor, as to, you know, how to proceed next time. I'm not sure that it would be, I'm not sure that it would be better to do given the $1 million, I'm not sure it would be better to do a complete review, you know, having been through this time. And, you know, it might make sense to do this more often. It might make sense to wait the 5 years. It might make sense maybe to spend $1.5 million. But I think, you know, I think we need to finish this one and kind of evaluate how it went and try to think about the next one before we decide which approach we want to use. I mean, it can also be done in-house. But the reason it was important to go to KRT is that we were looking at a equalization ratio for commercial properties, which was 97%, suggesting commercial properties was only going to go up 3%. Now, it turns out that a lot of big sales had been disqualified and sort of weren't being considered in part of that, but I think KRT has straightened out a lot of this. And so I think I've kind of answered your question, but let me make this, I think this has been implicit in what I've been saying, but let's make this clear. The property tax rate is going to go down. Some people are afraid, oh my God, the 2579 is going to remain the property tax rate. It will not be, that will not be the case. Property tax rate is going to go down significantly That is why for some, if your home only goes up 10% in value, you're going to see a reduction in your property taxes. So that person will benefit. So the property tax rate is going to go down, no question about it. But there's a great variety of impacts that this thing is going to have on different homes, different families, and impact people in a lot of different ways. Some of which will be, in terms of their tax bill, quite, for some people positive, but for some people a significant increase.
Alderman McCarthy?
Question, did we ever vote on the motion for final passage?
Not yet. No. I thought that some of this might provide additional information. So, are there any other questions? Okay, the motion on the floor is for final passage of R18-068, the relative to the reappropriation of fiscal year FY 2019 escrows. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
This was an amended, this particular submittal I handed out tonight was amended for the 80,000 that the mayor described, so I don't know if you want to apologize for not making that clear, but it's slightly different than the original.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do remember, and the clerk does have the, just to verify the amended version that you put in with this journal. May I make the recommendation, though, to the chair, if he so wishes, that I would like to introduce a motion for final passage on the amended proposal as handed by Mr. Griffin through the clerk.
Alderman McCarthy, is that the procedural way to handle it?
I suspect it's unnecessary. I mean, everybody knows what document we voted on this evening. You're sending it back to.
And we will introduce it as the amended version at the full board level.
And there was that one change, moving 80,000 from a like to
Right.
like to, all right,
No.
thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and
Easier.
members of the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, where are we?
New business?
New business ordinances,
There are none?
general discussion. Public comment, we have no members of the public. Remarks by Alderman? I would suggest, if at all possible, that you attend your ward, well, you're Alderman at large, so you can go to any of them. But it's interesting, so, to say the least. There's no reason for non-public. Do I hear a motion? Alderman Wiltshire?
Move to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned at 8:17.